1947, Hastings, England. When Aleister Crowley died in a modest boarding house, he left behind something that would confound researchers for decades. A body of work so steeped in scandal and mystery that separating fact from legend became nearly impossible. Among his manuscripts and personal diaries, some deliberately encrypted, others ravaged by time, they found the records of a man who had devoted his entire life to a single obsession, tearing down every barrier between the sacred and the profane. Aleister Crowley, to some, a revolutionary genius. To others, the very embodiment of evil. But separating the real man from the persona he crafted himself has become one of the greatest challenges for biographers and researchers. As biographer Lawrence Sutin notes, Crowley lived in an era where scandal and self-promotion went hand in hand. He knew that sparking horror also meant securing attention. The answer lies buried in a story that defied conventions, shattered taboos, and shaped modern occultism in ways that even today few dare to fully grasp. (1875). In Victorian England, where Christian morality governed every facet of social life, Edward Alexander Crowley was born. In a family of wealthy, devoutly religious brewers, no one could have imagined that this child would become the greatest spiritual provocateur of his era. The young Aleister grew up stifled by the rigidity of the Plymouth Brethren, an ultra-conservative Christian sect. Every pleasure was a sin, every question, heresy, every natural impulse, an abomination in the eyes of God. But at 11, something shifted forever. With his father's death, the boy uncovered an unsettling truth. The absence of God didn't bring punishment, it brought freedom. In the halls of Cambridge University, Crowley found his true calling. It wasn't traditional studies that captivated him, but something far more dangerous. The possibility that powers existed beyond ordinary human understanding. And it was there, among forbidden volumes of ceremonial magic and hermetic texts, that Edward Alexander died symbolically. In his place, Aleister Crowley was born, a man determined to explore every abyss that society deemed untouchable. 1898. At 23, Crowley discovered the Golden Dawn, the most prestigious magical society in the Western world. It was exactly the environment he'd been searching for, until he realized it had its own limitations. While his peers were content with theories and decorous rituals, Crowley quickly gained a reputation for the intensity of his practices. William Butler Yeats, also a member of the order, wrote in private letters about the disturbingly obsessive nature of the young Crowley. But there was something calculated behind all that intensity. As Richard Kaczynski observes, Crowley understood that reputation and notoriety were forms of power. Every scandal was also a strategy. Crowley didn't just practice what he considered real magic, he deliberately cultivated his reputation as a dangerous figure. Every scandal, every controversy, every accusation only fueled his growing notoriety. London soon became too small for his ambitions. From 1900 onward, Crowley embarked on a journey that would take him to the most remote corners of the world, always in pursuit of forbidden knowledge and experiences that could push the boundaries of human consciousness. But it was in Egypt in 1904 that Aleister Crowley would experience the event that would forever transform not only his life but the entire course of modern occultism. Cairo, April 1904. In the midst of marital and financial turmoil, Crowley was trying to rebuild his life far from London's scandals when something extraordinary or unsettling happened. Rose, his wife, who had never shown any interest in the occult, began speaking about Horus, the Egyptian falcon god. To Crowley, this could not be a coincidence. They were staying near the Museum of Antiquities. For 3 consecutive days, 3 hours each, Crowley claimed to receive dictation from an entity named Iwes. Decades later, psychologists would study the phenomenon, some interpreting it as a complex dissociative experience, others as literary creativity in an altered state of consciousness. Today, they are known as angels and demons. Tomorrow, they will be known as something else. Crowley, likely referring to extra-dimensional beings, or as modern ufology knows them, the Greys. Liber al vel legis. The Book of the Law, just 65 pages, but it would become the foundation of the system Crowley called the lemma. The central phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," would be interpreted both as individual liberation and as justification for destructive behavior. But Crowley wasn't content with being just a prophet. In the Book of the Law, he identified himself as the beast of the apocalypse. The number 666 became his signature, a deliberate provocation that would ensure decades of notoriety. For over a decade, Crowley kept the manuscript almost a secret, but when he finally decided to put its teachings into practice publicly, the world wasn't ready for the consequences. 1920. The First World War had ravaged Europe, leaving a traumatized generation questioning every traditional value. It was in this context that Crowley, at 45, established what he called the Abbey of Thelema in Sicily. Far from the Victorian morality that had stifled him in his youth, Crowley created an experimental community where the teachings of Thelema were tested through daily rituals involving controlled drug use and ceremonial sexual practices. But according to Leah Hirsig, one of the residents, it wasn't the paradise we imagined. It was a place where human limits were constantly pushed. Betty May, wife of Rollo Loveday, wrote in her memoirs, "My husband arrived at the Abbey as a brilliant young artist. Within 6 months he was unrecognizable, physically weakened and mentally unstable." The residents of the Abbey took part in daily rituals that included the use of psychoactive substances, ceremonial sexual practices, and invocations of entities Crowley believed to be real cosmic forces. February 1923. The death of Raoul Loveday from typhoid fever at the Abbey sparked an international scandal. Though medical investigations found no evidence of poisoning, the British press erupted with sensationalist headlines. Mussolini, pressured by international public opinion, personally ordered Crowley Sepp's expulsion, but as Tobias Churton observes, the expulsion from Italy was the greatest marketing triumph of Crowley Sepp's career. It cemented his status as a legend. At 48, Crowley had achieved what few humans ever do. He became a living myth, but the personal cost was devastating. Addictions, illnesses, social isolation, and a reputation that would haunt him until his death. Expelled from Sicily and later banned from France, Crowley spent his final 25 years in a gradual but steady decline. Poor, dependent on heroin prescribed for chronic asthma, living in cheap boarding houses. But this physical decline masked a surprising intellectual vigor. Between 1923 and 1947, Crowley produced some of his most refined works, systematizing Thelema into a coherent philosophy that would influence spiritual movements for decades. His ideas were only just beginning their true journey across the world. But it was after his death that Aleister Crowley's true impact began to unfold. In the 1960s, as a new generation of youth challenged every traditional authority, they found in Crowley a forerunner of their own spiritual rebellion. Rock stars, artists, writers, and philosophers found in his words a liberation that conservative Christianity couldn't offer. "Do what thou wilt" became more than a religious commandment, it became a rallying cry for individual freedom. Today, bookstores around the world dedicate entire sections to modern occultism. Tarot systems, psychological astrology, ceremonial magic, nearly all of it carries some direct or indirect influence from the ideas Crowley systematized. But perhaps Crowley's greatest legacy wasn't his rituals or his mystical theories, it was his radical insistence that every individual must uncover their own spiritual truth, no matter how much it unsettled social conventions. Behind the mask of the beast was a man obsessed with a single question: what does it mean to be truly free in a world of artificial rules? We return to the archives Crowley left behind in Hastings. Decades of academic research have separated much of the myth from the reality. But one question remains open among historians and scholars of the occult. Perhaps the answer lies in the fact that, decades after his death, we're still discussing his ideas. We're still questioning his methods, we're still wondering if he found something true amid all the provocation. In an era where millions seek spirituality outside traditional religions, Aleister Crowley remains an impossible figure to ignore. Not because he was a saint or a demon, but because he dared to live uncompromised by the conventions of his time. He himself encapsulated this relentless quest for authenticity and transformation with the words, "The joy of life consists in the exercise of one's own energies, in continuous growth, in constant change, in the enjoyment of every new experience. To stop is simply to die. The eternal mistake of humanity is to establish an achievable ideal." See you on the next journey. Bye.